of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Department of Trade and Industry, and the Committee on Business and Investment Promotion welcomes you to the ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit.
In its bid to realize its vision of a resilient, inclusive, and people-oriented and people-centered community, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is pushing for more inclusive business models. Inclusive business refers to profitable core business models that engage poor and low-income communities as suppliers, distributors, customers, or business partners. Inclusive business models are characterized by financial viability, replicability, and scale, significant social impact, and strong business innovations. These business models greatly contribute to economic growth and sustainable development. Today, we engage in interactive discussions with industry leaders and key players, the private sector, government, and investors to formally introduce and build the case for inclusive business in ASEAN through exemplary models, instrumental government interventions, and regional support initiatives. Welcome to the 2017 ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit, pioneering change in the way we do business.
And now, please welcome the Philippine Secretary of Trade and Industry, Secretary Ramon M. Lopez.
The ASEAN policymakers, business champions, inclusive business advocates, to the finalists and nominees of the Inclusive Business Awards, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to the ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit. Allow me to begin by expressing my gratitude to all of you for attending this summit today. We have a powerhouse audience here with ASEAN ministers and officials, global inclusive business pioneers, CEOs of innovative corporations, civil society advocates from across the regions, and head of international finance agencies who joined me in the press conference earlier. To those who have traveled many miles, I hope you have a productive visit here in Manila, and may you feel the warmth of Filipino hospitality during your stay. I would like to recognize our partners from the Asian Development Bank, ADB, the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, ABAC. I understand Joey Concepcion, the chairman of ABAC, was here earlier. International Finance Corporation, IFC, Credit Suisse, and the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. We are very grateful for your invaluable contributions to this Inclusive Business Summit and Awards. Of course, I also thank my colleagues from the Department of Trade and Industry, the Board of Investments, and our other partners from other agencies for making this summit possible. Currently, the ASEAN region is in a strategic position of growth and is foreseen to expand from 4.5% in 2016 to 4.8% in 2017. Yet, over 300 million of our people across the region remain below subsistence level. Hence, the challenge we face today is more than just ensuring robust growth for the coming decades. It is ensuring that this growth is felt evenly across the region and within countries where inequality pervades. Even in the Philippines, the trust of the Duterte administration under what we call the Dutertenomics, or the summary of the 10-point socio-economic agenda, is really to widen the gains of development and reduce inequality across the country. As you know, while we've been achieving over 6.5% growth, touching 7 to 7.9% growth, especially for industry and manufacturing, there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to leveling the playing field, leveling and widening the gains of development. As the ASEAN chair for this year, the Philippines is set to implement strategic measures to achieve inclusive, innovation-led growth. We plan to achieve this through increasing trade and investment, integrating micro SMEs in the digital economy, and developing an innovation-driven economy. In line with this year's theme of partnering for change, engaging the world, the Philippines is aggressively pursuing 6 deliverables, one of which is promoting inclusive business to deep engagements with the low-income communities and micro-entrepreneurs as business partners. Our desire really is, if we are to touch the bottom of the pyramid, we really have to make them involved and be part of our, what we call the value chain in our operation. Every time I am in front of a group of especially big businesses, big business associations, I always challenge them, what is your inclusive business plan? We know that a lot of companies are aware of such business models, but unfortunately, much has yet to be achieved when it comes to really adopting an inclusive business model. What we really need is just to continuously pursue the advocacy of getting more and more awareness as to the beauty of having an inclusive business model, one that is sustainable, one that is really not just a dole-out, but really having a model that is really sustainably benefiting both sides as a supplier, a micro SME, let's say, or a farmer cooperative group, becoming a supplier and part of your value chain, the value chain of a bigger company. With more business opportunities opening up to small players in the region, ASEAN is gaining momentum towards a more resilient and sustainable economy. Governments are realizing that partnerships, especially with the private sector, are a key ingredient to achieving both national and regional goals. Innovative solutions from businesses shape the economy and can empower poor and marginalized communities through significant employment or entrepreneurial opportunities. Moreover, inclusive business is emerging as a viable means by which both social and economic goals can be achieved by the private sector. As we said, inclusive business is not just about helping small players, as big companies also benefit from partnerships that this model creates. By engaging low-income communities as partners, customers, suppliers, or employees in value chains, inclusive businesses can transform communities into new markets and new sources of entrepreneurial talent. Inclusive businesses go beyond philanthropy and invest in addressing the problems of the poor because it makes good business sense. As we say, doing good is good business. In effect, for companies adopting the inclusive model is doing good business. While private and public sectors have different approaches to practice inclusivity, the synergy between the two should push the shared goal of improving the quality of life of every Filipino and every ASEAN nationality, thus making a symbolic business model. I also wish to share that for Philippines, we encourage the corporate sector to rethink business strategies and develop inclusive business models. Companies may evolve their corporate social responsibility, or CSR, to becoming inclusive business models by integrating the poor, the marginalized, the farmers, cooperatives, the micro, small and medium entrepreneurs as part of their value chain, as part of their business operations. To tighten the link between large companies and small community enterprises, the Board of Investments, which is an attached agency of the Department of Trade and Industry, usually produces the Investment Priorities Plan, IPP. And for this year, a couple of weeks ago, we have issued, after it was approved and signed by President Duterte, we have issued the 2017 to 2019 Investment Priorities Plan, which includes fiscal incentives to companies, and then for the first time, those engaging in IB, or inclusive business. Taking inclusive business under its wing, the BOI will lead the evaluation of inclusive business projects in sectors of agribusiness and tourism. And by being part of the IPP, they are entitled to pioneer status. I think that's about a 5-year income tax holiday as part of the incentives to be given. If you ask me if there are already takers, since this was just launched a couple of weeks ago, we've sensed a lot of interest, but nothing or no company has yet been registered. They are all, shall we say, work in progress. And as of the moment, we are also continuing with our road shows so that we can really propagate and increase the level of awareness as far as the inclusive business model is concerned and its inclusion in the IPP. At the regional level, the Philippines, through its chairmanship, introduced inclusive business in ASEAN with the aim of strengthening, enabling policy environments, and encouraging greater regional collaboration and linkages towards cross-border investments with positive social impact. Significant progress has been achieved as the ASEAN Inclusive Business, or IB initiative, is now subsumed under the Strategic Action Plan for SME Development of the ASEAN Coordinating Committee on Micro SME Development. The ASEAN Inclusive Business Framework, or the AIBF, which is to be adopted by the ministers at this 49th Ministerial ASEAN Economic Ministers Meeting, is a breakthrough document stipulating the scope, objectives, guiding principles, implementation, and institutional framework of the IB. The AIBF aims to provide the basis upon which AMS, or ASEAN member states, can further engage and foster IB and contribute to global IB initiatives. The added value of the AIBF rests in providing guidance to the ACC MSME in the emerging and progressing field of inclusive business, and in bridging the AEC, the ASEAN Economic Community, and the ASCC visions in terms of the private sector contribution towards lifting the quality of life of the ASEAN people through increased economic participation. ASEAN has yet to discover and maximize the regional potentials of the inclusive business. With distinguished guest panelists, luminaries in our panel today, I am confident that we will have an interesting exchange of best practices and thoughts along the way, moving forward for an inclusive business in ASEAN from the perspective of business, government, and investors. I think the most important takeaway after this summit is to really first generate awareness, generate new ideas, new way of doing good in doing business, new ways of finding out what are the, unique and inspiring business models that we can also adopt in our respective countries or our respective companies. The inclusive business companies with us today prove that these models can exist, thrive, and change lives of individuals, communities, and countries if we are able to pioneer change in the way we do business. More than just a buzzword, we envision inclusive business as the new business as usual, or probably the new norm, with ASEAN at the forefront of this next generation of businesses. Maraming salamat po. Thank you and mabuhay kayong lahat.
Thank you very much once again, Secretary Ramon Lopez, for that inspiring speech. Now, to set the context upon which to view inclusive business in ASEAN, from the Director of Public Management, Financial Sector and Trade Division, Southeast Asia Asian Development Bank, Mr. Kelly Bird.
Good afternoon, participants to the ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit. Today I want to talk about inclusiveness in ASEAN, but from the perspective of the labour market. And this is important because the labour market is one of the most important channels for helping particularly young people productively integrate into the economy. It's also one of the most important channels for helping to reduce income inequality. And income inequality is considered relatively high here in the Philippines, but also in other ASEAN countries, Thailand and Indonesia. Now, in my presentation, I'm going to talk about two practical examples. Examples of how the Asian Development Bank is supporting the government of Philippines address the issue of exclusion in the labour market. The first program is designed to help or to assist young people become job ready. The second one is to help employees have access to lifetime skills development. These are important because the labour markets in ASEAN are rapidly changing. And a lot of the studies that are coming out today are showing that many of the jobs we have today won't be around in 20, 25 years from now. So it is critically important for governments in the private sector, families, to prepare for that transition. Now, the programs that I'll talk about are based on two principles. The first is youth employment programs and skills development must be enterprise-led. It's employers that know what skills they need and what type of employees they want. So getting them involved in public programs is critically important for the effectiveness. The other principle is that the role of the public sector or governments, it's not so much about training young people, but more about providing the funding for them to have access to skills training and employment. Now, before I talk about those two programs, I want to talk about some very sad facts about the Philippines. I'm just going to skip these ones. Okay. As an economist, and when we're looking at the labour market, there's one particular data that we want to look at, and that is the share of young people, and in this case, young Filipinos between the ages of 15 and 24, the share of them that are not in employment, education, or training. These are those that are economically inactive, essentially those that are excluded. We did a study a number of years ago that looked at households in Metro Manila and Cebu, but also looking at the labour force statistics. But let me give you some sad facts. First of all, 1 in 4 young Filipinos at any one time are not in employment, education, or training. So that's 25% of this large cohort that are essentially excluded from the labour market. The figures in the Philippines are not that different from, say, other large countries like Indonesia. We can look at some of the risk factors. Who's most at risk of being excluded in the labour market? a woman, so there's a gender bias, particularly young women. 1 in 3 young women are not in employment, education or training at any one time. And it gets worse. Education really does matter. 1 in 2 young Filipino women who have high school education or less are going to be excluded from the labour market. It also depends on the income status of the family. We looked at households. Let me explain what this figure shows. The horizontal axis classifies households by their position in the income distribution. So high refers to the 20% richest households. Low refers to the 20% poorest households in the Philippines. The vertical axis is the share of young people between the ages of 15 and 24 that are not in employment, education or training. And you can see from that figure that young women from low-income households are highly at risk of being excluded from the labour market. We also did the same for young men. Rates are lower, but again, it's very striking that you'll see those low-income, young men from low-income families are more likely to be excluded from the labour market. And being excluded from the labour market traps young people into lifetime poverty or being at the bottom of the income distribution. It also puts pressure on social cohesion. Let me just to highlight this one. If you are a college graduate, you're likely to get, on average, 45% higher income than those who just graduate from high school. And again, there are gender differences. Not so much with college graduates. So if men and women graduate from college, men earn on average just under 10% more than females. Not a bad figure, but when you look at high school graduates, men are earning 22% more than females. Okay, let me turn to some of the programs that we have been supporting the Philippines government to address some of these issues of exclusion. And the first one is Job Start Philippines, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with this program. This is done in partnership with the Asian Development Bank, the Government of Canada, that has helped to fund grants, and the Department of Labour and Employment. And the program is designed to assist that particular target group, those out-of-school youth, with a full set of employment services to help them become job-ready and better prepare them for the labour market. Now, I'm not going to go, you don't have to sort of go for each box on this figure, but this gives you an illustration of how the program works. Essentially, it's done through the local government, Public Employment Service Office. Young people register for the program if they're between the ages of 18 and 24, high school education or more. 60% should be women, so there is a gender quota. They go through a skills assessment, look at what are their competencies, their skills. Then they go through a 10-day life skills training course. You've got to also understand a lot of these young people are from low-income families, so they didn't develop those life skills that we would learn by default. So they go through a 10-day course which talks about teaches them very interactively how to write a resume, how to prepare for an interview, how to perform in an interview, how to behave in the workplace, financial literacy, reproductive health, and other health issues to keep themselves healthy in the labour market. After that, they go through career guidance, and then they are referred to employers who are pre-qualified to join the program. If the employer takes them on, they sign up on a training plan for up to 3 months technical training, 3 months internship. The employer is not obliged to take them on at the end of the program, but the important measurement of success of the program is that those young people can find similar jobs. Many of the employers that participate are large employers. We have McDonald's that participates in it. Burger King has taken on job starters. Some of the BPOs, such as Cytel, has taken them on. And a lot of other smaller firms in the service industry. the program is highly subsidized, so employers are provided with grants for technical training and the internship. This program, just let me explain quickly how it's developed. With funding from the Government of Canada, we worked with the Department of Labour to pilot Job Start in 4 cities. In 2013 to 2015, 1,600 young people went through the program, and it was really to test strategies, what can work here in the Philippines environment. And what we did find from that pilot, 75% of those young people did find employment at the end of the program. On average, it cost about $800, so it's not a cheap program, but it's half the price of similar programs in, say, Latin America. The Department of Labour was very proactive. They were in the driver's seat of this program, and they were committed to this program. And back in 2014, they started to draft legislation. They worked with Congress, and in 2016, Congress passed legislation called Institutionalizing Job Start Philippines Act. So it's essentially made this program a permanent program of the Government of Philippines and ensured that they would secure budget funding. The Department of Labour has a rollout plan. 2015 to 2020 is the first phase. This year, by the end of this year, 31 LGUs will be implementing the program in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. At the end of 2020, we hope that at least 50,000 young people would have gone through this program. I want to show you this picture of Rosemary. Rosemary joined the program, the pilot program. She's from Quezon City. She left high school around the age of 16, became a single mother, was excluded from the labour market. By accident, she was walking through the shopping mall in Quezon City and joined the program. She turned out to be one of the stars of the program. She then got referred to a cosmetic surgeon called Image Doctor in Quezon City, and she was trained under the program as a hair technician. After the program finished, the company, Dr. Sanchez, retained her and 4 other young ladies as regular employees of the surgery. So now she is a hair transplant technician. Very technical job, but the program, this is an example of a young lady who was excluded from the labour market, but just got that break at the right time, and it's been life-changing for her. I just want to now quickly turn on to the next program that we're developing with the government, and this is an enterprise learning network. We piloted this in the Department of Tourism. Essentially, it's a grant scheme. Government sets up the grant scheme. The pilot was funded through funding from the Government of Canada. There was plenty of employer outreach, and employers are actually asked to form networks, clusters of like-minded employers. They do a training needs assessment, identify what skills their employees need, and what they would then develop the training plan. They would then identify who those trainers would be, either in-house, in industry, could be TVET providers, could be overseas. They then make proposals and apply for grants. Grants have gone through a committee and are awarded, and the employees are trained. So this was piloted in the Department of Tourism. It builds on some very successful programs in other countries, such as the Republic of Ireland. And let me just talk about what happened with the Department of Tourism. So we piloted it in 4 pilots, again in 2013, 2015. They are the locations. We awarded 48 grants to single enterprises or consortiums for a total of $1.2 million. And DOT is rolling it out, but we are discussing with the Department of Labour of expanding that to a much more to a nationwide program. But under this program, training was very cost effective. On average, it cost $131 per trainee. Over 7,000 were trained, and about 1/5 of them got certified, either through TESA as NC1 or NC2, or some kind of overseas certification. Let me just give you one example. The Corone Restaurant Consortium, just before I finish up. One of the grantees was a consortium of 12 restaurants in Corogne. They got together all their employees. They did their own training needs assessment, developed their own training programs, and they were trained in kitchen management. They were trained in food and beverages, but also on food safety. And some of the results or outcomes of that training were labor turnover was lower. There was a reduction in complaints from customers. You know, the rating was improved service. Food quality was much better. They also had an increase in profits. So these are two programs that we've piloted. Job Start's been rolled out. We hope that the Enterprise Learning Network will also be a program that we can roll out over the next 2 to 3 years. It's still, the nationwide scheme is still under concept design. I'm going to finish there. They were two examples of how ADB partnering with government and enterprises can help design interventions that can help target certain groups to be included in the labour market. Thank you very much.
Let's all give Mr. Kelly Bird another round of applause. Today's summit has been divided into 3 main sessions, the first being partnering for competitive and inclusive business models. We've invited a panel of esteemed business leaders from the private sector to share their inputs and insights on this topic. To introduce them, please welcome our moderator, Operations Officer, Inclusive Business Team, International Finance Corporation World Bank Group, Ms. Kathleen Mignano.
I'm pleased to be moderating this next session, which I think really gets at the heart of why we're all here, to really learn more about these inclusive business models and hear it directly from the people that are running them. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and invite the panelists to come up. First, we have Mr. Giovanni Alengog, CEO and President of Glovax Biotech Corp. Mr. Kelvin Ung, Managing Director for Asia Pacific at Binka Seafoods. Ms. Marianne Sayok, Group Lead for Public Affairs at East West Seed Group, and Mr. Simon Bacher, CEO for Kennemer Foods International. So again, I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to really learn more of the details about the inclusive business models directly from the people that are working and developing them. But I think we would all agree that inclusive businesses don't operate in a vacuum. They're part of a larger ecosystem, an ecosystem which is really composed of NGOs, research institutes, international organizations, and not the least of which being the public sector. So I think we're going to ask each of the panelists to come up and give us some insight into their business, but also to really touch upon the role that partnerships have played in the growth and in operation of your business. So Giovanni, I think we'll start with you and then go down the line. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that you can be asking questions while they're doing the presentations through the Slido app. I think it is just the hashtag inclusive business, and you can just submit your questions, and we'll see who gets the most likes, and we can pick out those questions at the end. Giovanni? Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm Giovanni Alingog, and I'm the co-founder of Glovax Biotech Corp. So Glovax is actually into vaccine distribution. We started in that, and we are now also a retail vaccination company wherein we do our own injections or vaccinations through our clinics. We believe that vaccination is for everyone, and thus we consider ourselves as an inclusive business. We all know that vaccination is a very sensitive topic, or should I say controversial. When I speak, I do get a lot of criticism or even threats, but I did not choose this business. I was only in this business by accident because in 2003, I accidentally got married to a pediatrician. So, so as you know, pediatricians are the one doing vaccination rounds. And in 2003, she's always complaining about, the vaccines not being available or the vaccines not being delivered on time. And at the time, I was doing a small business of logistics and delivery company. And she always nags me, and, I thought, is this marriage? It's like, I need to find a solution, otherwise I would be divorced or separated early on. So, I tried to find a solution and converted my distribution company into a vaccine company. So, had I been married to, say, other profession, then I might not be in inclusive business at all. So, I hope that I would not get so much criticism and threats, being in the business we're in. Like some people would have told me before that it should have been the government who is doing this, So anyway, so that's my wife actually on the left side. So in one of our many vaccination missions. So we not only sell vaccines, but we also provide free vaccinations to the poorest of the poor. So to date, we have sold more than 5 million doses and have probably prevented 2 million people from contracting deadly diseases. You see, vaccination does not really work if only the rich gets vaccinated. It has to be the entire community, including the poor. So however, we cannot serve everyone, and that the government is doing its job in providing basic vaccines to the poorest of the poor. Hence, our target are those who are not rich enough to pay for the expensive vaccines in the private clinics and in the private hospitals, but also does not want to get free vaccinations from the government health centers. These are the people we call the missing middle. So by initially importing our own brand of vaccines, we provide an affordable alternative to the more expensive branded vaccines. We are able to reduce as much as 75% of the price of the multinational corporations. We also import and still make available the vaccines that are no longer sold by the MNCs because the MNCs are now more focused on the new and more expensive vaccines. And we also distribute these vaccines in far-flung areas which are too far and too small of a market for the MNCs. Thus, we also become the last-mile distributor of vaccines in the Philippines. So as you can see, these are some of the vaccinations that we do. We are the only company that also provides installment payment for vaccinations, which makes our vaccines even more affordable. We are only focused on vaccines. And by doing all this, we provide access to the missing middle. We also provide, as I've said, free vaccinations to the bottom of the pyramid in partnerships with the Rotary International and other organizations. To date, we have vaccinated a total of 133,000 individuals for free. And when we say we vaccinate, as you can see, we are the ones, including my wife, doing the actual vaccination. So as far as competitiveness and partnership, we do have partners other than non-government organizations. We also partner with our government as we are now proposing to build a vaccine plant in Davao City. As you may all know, among the original members of ASEAN, it's only the Philippines who doesn't have its own vaccine plant. So that is what we propose to our government. And this is under the public-private partnership with the Department of Health under the Build, Operate, and Transfer Law. This will make the supply of vaccines stable and make the vaccines always available at a predetermined price, which makes budgeting and funding by the government becoming a lot easier. This will benefit not only the missing middle, but the bottom of the pyramid, because the government health centers will have a steady supply of vaccines. This will bring in the much needed technology for us to also develop and produce our own vaccines, especially those diseases that are endemic in our country. So this also includes a research and development facility. So that's our presentation with the Department of Health. And in the beginning, the DOH consider us as their competitor because we are also providing the same service as what they are providing. But once they understood that we are complementary, the government, started liking our proposal, because not everyone would want to go to the government facilities, and that the government would not also be able to give all the vaccines for free. So we become a partner with the Department of Health and other departments in the government once they are empowered by our President Duterte to pursue these kinds of projects, such as the vaccine plant and the free vaccination for all. We are a BOI, or Board of Investments registered company before, and which ended in 2015. And we do hope to be able to register again in the investments, in the inclusive business category. And our other partner in government is the Department of Science and Technology, which also evaluated our technology for the vaccine plant. So we believe that we can prevent diseases through vaccinations, and these are examples of the diseases that we can prevent, and that the partnership with the DOH will bring about 60 billion pesos in savings throughout the life of the plant. And that does not include the medical expenses that the people were prevented from these diseases. And also, we have not able to quantify how much is the cost of one life saved from a deadly disease. But if I can save one life, then I think all these efforts, criticisms, and pains and hurdles are worth doing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Giovanni. I guess we can see that it's not just a business opportunity or a social impact, but it brings marriage benefits as well. Kelvin, if you want to come up next. Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm going to lighten the topic a little bit from vaccines to food. This part of the world, we all really live to eat, not the other way around, and it explains my belly. I work for a company called Binka, and Binka basically is a company that was built on providing clean, healthy, traceable food. And our whole company ethos was basically to do that. But the challenge we faced was that only the top of the pyramid is able to afford the food that we produce. So not too long ago, we've decided that we wanted to really make it mass and go big on organic. So we teamed up with a standards body called Nachulan. And Nachulan is headquartered in Germany, but it's a standard, I would call it a gold standard, that was created by farmers. And really what it is not just an eco-label. It really has a lot of credibility with farmer knowledge that was built in Europe over the last 35 years. So what Binka attempted to do was to try and bring that to Asia, and this is really the topic of my presentation today. In Singapore, where I'm from, and in all the ASEAN countries that I travel to, the biggest problem we have with the food we consume is that consumers have a lot of mistrust about what's on the label. There's a lot of what I call self-certifications, self-declarations about how healthy their products are. A lot of very innovative marketing, I must say. But actually, it boils down to what are the inputs and what are the outputs. And trust and credibility is utmost on the minds of most consumers when they go shopping. Can I trust this piece of fish, this piece of meat, this vegetable, this fruit that I put into my body? So that's number one. The second one is when you have certification or you have international credible certification, you get market access. And this is especially important for SMEs, where you can associate yourself with an eco-label that provides credibility and trust. Traceability is the third one, and that's really the toughest one and where a lot of the cost is. It's not in the certification, actually it's in the ability to track all your inputs and outputs. That's the third most important thing for farmers today. And finally is to level the playing field. In ASEAN today, there are a couple of national standards. Thailand has one, India has one. Everybody has their own standard, but there's no harmonization across. And we hope that through ASEAN, that harmonization will happen faster than it is today because consumers are asking for it. So let me talk about Nachulan. Nachulan is a privately held, independent certification that is headquartered in Germany. And it was built on 3 groups of people, basically scientists, farmers, and consumers. And by the end of this year, Nachulan would have established an office, an Asia-Pacific office here in this part of the world, providing technical support to our farmers and helping them with their fertilizers, if they need to use fertilizers, with their composting, all the innovative technology involved in farming. It's a non-profit, and how Nachulan generates its income to support the standard is by charging a royalty on the eco-label. It's not small. It's been around since 1982, so it's 35 years. And you can see that today it's about 43,000 farmers all around the world, 700 processors in 46 countries. It's quite, if you go to Vietnam and Thailand, Nachulan is quite active there. And actually, what's also interesting about this program is not just on the supply side of things, it's also on the demand side. And I was brought up in the commercial world, and I always believed that, you know, there's no point in having a program if you're talking to yourself. It has to be led by the market, and this is a program that's led by the market. So the retailers actually play a huge part in this, because if you want to feed the masses, you really have to go into retail, B2C, internet, e-commerce, and Nachulan does that. They work with retailers, for example, they work with Little Riway in Europe, and these retailers, they drive the demand. They help pull these farmers up the value chain, and that's critical for this to work in ASEAN. So apart from just being a consumer-facing eco-label that consumers trust, it also has 2 other attributes which is quite important. One of them is social. So it's really about the working conditions of our farmers, and if you've been around to the farms in many parts of ASEAN, it's quite are quite depressed, and Nachulan will ensure that these farmers abide by certain rules in order to get the eco-label. The third one is fair trade. I think a lot of my former speakers today talked about how you have to pay the farmers a decent wage. And because Nachulan, it's difficult to get the certification, but when you do get the certification, it does command a premium in the marketplace. So it goes back to us being able to pay the farmers a decent wage. So in essence, and I'm a pretty commercial guy that's trying to work in a non-profit space. And what I've noticed is that ASEAN has done a really good job in trying to develop an ASEAN organic standard. But I think in parallel to it, we should not reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of very good practices out there, and by having Nachulan establish its office here in this part of the world, governments can really leverage its expertise and not try and reinvent it again. So what I'm proposing is that apart from continuing the great work that ASEAN is doing on creating an ASEAN organic framework, why don't you use the private sector to drive it? Let the consumers distinguish between what is organic and what's not organic. That will probably accelerate the program quite fast. So one of the proposals is basically setting up a organic sustainable fund in ASEAN, and that was what happened in Europe. And farmers would then be able to get subsidies from this fund to get certified third party. And then from there, they have a 3-year period to get certified, and Natureland will provide the eco-label so that they can then assess the markets. So this is key here to help the farmers during the initial years, but once they get certified, the market comes apace for itself. So it's sustainable, so you don't have to worry about subsidies anymore. So this is one proposal that we have. This is my last slide, and basically I wanted to share, water is very important, and here in the IB Summit, yesterday we went to see Manila Water. It's really the crux of everything we do in farming. And in Germany, way back in 1992, in the Mangfall Valley where it supplies the water into Munich, what the government did was very smart because they realized that there were a lot of nitrates being used in farming and that's flowing into the waters. So instead of investing in water treatment facilities, which is very costly, they encouraged the farmers to get Natureland organically certified. So the reduction in the use of nitrates resulted in clean drinking water, and today you can just turn on the tap and drink the water. So this is an example of what we can do here in ASEAN, using the private sector to try and drive change down the supply chain. And I think this is really a perfect example because water is really pivotal to our survival. And I hope that you can give some thought to that, and if there's any questions or you feel like you need to talk more about organic, I'm known as Mr. Organic in my part of the world, so if anybody have any questions on what's organic and what's not organic, feel free to approach me after the speech. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kelvin. I think you raised some really interesting points as far as not reinventing the wheel, learning from partnerships in other regions even that have been working, and of course making sure that there's a market orientation that is financially sustainable. Thanks. Mary?
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this important gathering of IB advocates and practitioners. Well, Kelvin talked about food. Let me bring you back to the start of the production of the supply chain, which is seed. So let me also start by saying something about our company. East-West Seed introduced market-oriented plant breeding in Southeast Asia in 1982, with the main focus on developing improved vegetable varieties adapted to local markets and growing conditions. East-West Seeds actually started in the Philippines 35 years ago. Today, we are one of the 10 largest vegetable seed companies in the world. We are market leaders in the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and Myanmar. We are also present in India, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Latin America, and Africa. Last year, we were ranked #1 in the Global Access to Seed Index. We export seeds to over 60 countries, and we have 15 research centers in 7 countries, and we have 5,000 employees worldwide. East-West Seeds' business model is centered on smallholder farmers, both as primary customers and as suppliers. Smallholder farmers produce 85% of the world's food on an average of less than 2 hectares of land. Vegetable farmers grow crops in less than 5,000 square meters. Vegetables are high-value crops and provide farmers abundant opportunities for income diversification and higher productivity. Our company makes quality seeds available and affordable through our value packs or small pouches sold at $1 per pouch. And these value packs contain information on how to grow the crops. So these are, worth 50 pesos or $1. And this even also have a QR code which farmers can, they can link to our plant doctor online and they can be guided on diagnosing what is wrong with their plants. Having good quality seeds is not enough to ensure profitable farming. It should be complemented with good farming practices to realize the full potential of improved varieties. So farmer education is actually the key. In partnership with national government agencies like the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Agrarian Reform, local government units and NGOs, East West Seed conducts farmer field schools, set up variety demonstration trials, and organize field days and harvest festivals. Smallholder farmers are an essential part of our core value chain as seed suppliers. We engage in contract seed growing. As an example, East West Seed Indonesia has 12,500 contract farmers, with each farmer growing seeds in less than 5,000 square meters of land. They employ 62,500 pollinators, mostly women, per growing season. Contract farmers earn an average monthly income of $160 on a 1,000 square meter of land. The company provides seedlings and technical assistance. Farmers are assured of the market and paid a fixed contract price for raw seeds. Another example is East West Seed Philippines. We have 4,760 contract seed producers and 26,000 pollinators, of which 80% are women. The average area per grower is 3,900 square meters. These contract farmers are organized into 7 cooperatives. They get an interest-free production loan from the cooperative and from the company. 3 cooperatives are being financed by a government financing institution, the Land Bank of the Philippines. The average monthly income per farmer is $173, also on a 1,000 square meter of land for one growing season. This same model is also replicated in East West Thailand and East West Myanmar. Now, what is the impact to the base of the pyramid? This inclusive model results to increased productivity and income to smallholder farmers and improved quality of life. With earnings from a small plot of land, farmers are able to send their children to school, build concrete houses, buy home appliances and farm equipment. It helps develop the community by generating jobs for otherwise idle hands, as in the case of the pollinators. Also, farmers learn new skills or are introduced to new technologies. Now, how does this inclusive model benefit our company? This model ensures a more reliable and more cost-efficient supply chain. In fact, without these smallholder seed producers, our business will not thrive. So 90 to 95% of our seeds that we sell are produced by smallholder farmers. Now, to sustain this inclusive business model and to address the challenges faced by smallholder farmers, the private sector should partner with government in agribusiness entrepreneurship education or mentorship. And this through farmer field schools, not only entrepreneurship, but also on the technical side through farmer field schools. Also in modernizing the supply chain through improved infrastructure like farm-to-market roads, irrigation facilities, and post-harvest technology. I emphasize this because right now, most of the programs of the Department of Agriculture are actually focused on rice and corn farmers. Vegetable farmers are not able to really avail of like irrigation facilities for their vegetables. And so we would really like to see some more, government funding also addressing the needs of vegetable farmers. Then we talk also about better access to financial services and weather-based index crop insurance and linked to market. There is a need for government to provide the enabling environment to improve the investment climate and integrate smallholders into markets. And I'd like to end by citing a quote by Helen Keller, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." Thank you for your kind attention.
Thanks so much, Mary. And I think in this case, we really see an inclusive business model that goes full circle with the farmers, both as customers and as suppliers. And then we also see partnerships that touch on different areas, both on the capacity and the knowledge, but also on the financing side. That's very interesting. Thanks. Simon, if you want to come up.
Good afternoon. We'll switch from vegetables to chocolate, cacao, cocoa in English, cacao in most of our, here we say cacao, otherwise we all think it's coconut. The macro story is ASEAN production is declining, Asian demand of chocolate is increasing, there's a mismatch in production. The Philippines is an excellent location to increase cacao production. Cacao globally is grown 90% by smallholder farmers, and we have a lot of smallholder farmers in the Philippines. We like a little shade, we have lots of coconut land. And so we felt that increasing ASEAN production, the Philippines to be a good kind of starting point to grow the industry. Philippine production is actually fairly small, so we're coming from a small base. Kennemer Foods is an agricultural company really focused on cacao and really trying to build the cacao industry in the Philippines in a sustainable way. That means high yields and high quality. And this is really trying to get cacao as a kind of, we call it a cacao 2.0, a new version of cacao growing. So how do we do that? The key really for us is a grower program where we help our growers become professional cacao farmers, right? We work with existing cacao farmers, but since there are really too few in the Philippines, a lot of our focus is on building new cacao farmers. And so, Marianne, earlier we talked about vegetables. I wish vegetables, it goes so fast, right? In 3 months you have production. It takes, this is a tree. It takes 3 years before you're really productive. So it is the same system, but it really takes a little bit more effort to get there. We have some managed farms as well to really show best practices, but I would say 90 to 95% of our effort and our production really comes from the grower program. The key there is earlier, it was mentioned already, is you need to make financing available to farmers. We have been blessed with good collaboration with Land Bank of the Philippines and have worked on good programs disbursing kind of, crop-sensitive loans to farmers and farmer groups. Loans that match the cash flow of the crop. Besides, we also have launched, to make it more dynamic, our own finance company to allow us to go to those areas where maybe Land Bank and its cooperatives are not present or maybe they're not eligible today. And this has given us a lot of flexibility. The other point, of course, is good planting material. Good modern clonal planting material needs to be available in the right varieties, different varieties. Every farmer should at least plant 5 varieties in their farm. We operate over 15 nurseries in a combined hectarage of 30 hectares. Throughout the country of nurseries, producing one of the ASEAN largest private nursery provider for cacao. Training and supervision, cacao is, unlike coconut, which almost grows by itself, it really needs tender love and care, and that means you need training. Earlier we talked about training. Key here is that training needs to be on an ongoing basis, right? Not a one-week training. You really need to get farmers involved, retraining to be sure that they really know how to get the maximum yield from their crop. Monitoring, field technicians are necessary then to follow up, go to the farms, give coaching on the farm. If you don't follow up, it really is hard to get the quality result. Post-harvest assistance, right? A lot of value is destroyed, unfortunately, at the very end of the process because of lack of drying, lack of storage, and also because of lack of proper fermentation, where really the cacao or the chocolate flavor is created. Guaranteed buyback is something that we provide all our growers, and this is an important part because if you plant trees, you need to know that come 5 years, 7 years from now, you are guaranteed for that offtake because you're going to put a lot of effort in growing this crop and maybe take out a loan, which is your largest loan ever, in order to produce it. So the assurance of market is a critical component to get this whole process started. So this summarizes a little bit the grower program. Okay, an essential building block for us are the consolidating units, farmer consolidators that have groups of farmers. We work today with 15,000 farmers, and we have more than 700 farmer entrepreneurs, consolidators. These are MSMEs that organize maybe 15 to 20 growers, some inside larger cooperatives or some just organized by themselves. Key there really is to get the yield up. And so with our program, you see a big impact on, compared to traditional cacao farming practices, what is the actual yield being achieved in the field. And this has a big impact on income. A 1 hectare coconut farm per annum makes maybe net income after cost of $500 per hectare. With a cacao there, you add another 3,000, and so you're really looking at 5-6x income increase. I mentioned earlier, we work with 15,000 farmers. We've planted 20,000 hectares by now, so we still have some way to go to get our 50,000 hectares planted, but we are, well on the way today. Where do we do this? We do this mostly in the south of the Philippines. That doesn't mean that in Luzon it's not good for planting cacao. It's partly historic. This is where we started. Good climatic conditions, also kind of good farmers to work with. And so really this is the area where we continue to expand in the south. It's also one of the poorest areas in the Philippines. Now, partnerships, the government has been a very important partner for us on different levels. The Department of Agrarian Reform has been essential for us in organizing farmer groups, and we have used that organizing principles of these agrarian reform beneficiaries as a way to get grower communities. I earlier mentioned financing. Land Bank of the Philippines has been and is still a critical partner, and we're very excited about the recent fiscal incentives that have been announced under the DTI BOI, and we are in the process of availing from them. I think moving forward, if you look at the opportunities for collaboration with government, I think every business is local business. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with specific LGUs or municipalities and then work on convergence of programs. There are many, many programs in various line agencies in the government, whether it's the Philippine Coconut Authority, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and to converge those into focus areas or municipalities where we are active is important. Otherwise, the danger is that all these interventions become too diluted to really have an impact. So I think that's an opportunity. And I think the other point in the future, from a collaboration perspective, we really are looking forward to working with government on building a regulatory framework that really enforces quality of produce, that lets the Philippines be recognized as a quality producer. And so I think regulatory framework is another area. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Simon. I think, again, we see the importance of different types of partnerships for different purposes, but also the need for that long-term vision and that long-term commitment when you're working with inclusive business models. So I think, Simon, you talked about the opportunities for more partnerships, but I think that we all know that partnerships are not always easy, especially when we have people who are typically talking the language of the private sector versus the language of the public sector. Sometimes it's hard. And I think we've all seen here that partnerships can work. So I think I'd like to ask each of you to think about maybe a particular challenge that you faced in developing your partnerships. And a key success factor or a lesson learned that we can all take away on something that helped you to overcome that challenge? Giovanni, maybe we'll start with you here.
Hello. Yeah. So, well, it's always tricky talking to the government. So, in fact, in our case, we really have to convince them that it's something that we need. It's something that we are lagging behind in terms of our ASEAN neighbors, and it requires a lot of open communication with them. So that's actually our challenges and opportunities as well. Is that because of this current administration, they are new, so they are more open to accepting newer ideas and all that. So.
Great, thanks. Importance of being open and lots of communication. Calvin?
I guess for me, I'm always thinking about organic. One of the challenges we have is that I think we are so diverse as a region. Language and also finding that common baseline where everyone can collaborate. I think that's key. What we try to do in Binka is really to digitize. So stay tuned for that. So we digitize the supply chain. So we using technology to overcome some of these language barriers, cost barriers. So I think that's probably where the lower hanging fruit is. So we are digitizing farms, we are digitizing retailers. Soon you'll be able to see how your vegetables are being grown online. You can see how pigs are grown, how chicken is grown, and you can place your order online and it'll be delivered to your home. So I think that's kind of the future of organic. And I hope ASEAN would be able to leapfrog Europe and US and be ahead of the other regions, just using technology as our boost.
Great, so really finding those common areas of interest and using these types of data and platforms that you can really build off of. Great, Marianne?
Yeah, I think key also is really gaining the trust of our partners. So in the projects that we do, it's really finding the right partner. We're having the shared objective, shared values, and also, as I said, gaining their trust. If we see also here, I mentioned some of the challenges, but also an opportunity for partnership. I didn't mention yet Department of Trade and Industry, but we would really like to partner with DTI. There is one constraint, one big challenge that our seed producers are facing actually, because we only actually get the seeds. So they are left with, like if we talk about pumpkin, they are left with the flesh of the pumpkin and they don't know what to do with it. Maybe in terms of, some processing and some packaging. We would really like, some assistance from the Department of Trade and Industry. Imagine, we are talking about like 1,000 tons of pumpkin, calabaza flesh, and just, thrown away. So those kind of examples.
Great, again, the importance of trust in developing partnerships. Simon?
Yeah, just to add, I agree with these points. I think the point I want to highlight is the point I made in the end, is in a way that government's mandate is to help as many as possible people as quickly as it can. And inclusive businesses work in specific geographies, work in specific areas, and in order to collaborate, there is a need to go focused and maybe start in small areas while the government is trying to move fast and at grand scale. And that is a tension sometimes that needs to be worked out. So in a partnership, it is important for both parties. On the one hand, I think for government to realize that pilots need to be focused and need to be successful in a local context of a municipality or community. But then for government to really help and to roll out, there needs to be a kind of a rollout model or a scale-up model. Otherwise, the impact is too small. And so I think that tension between local success and need to scale up is something that needs to be really addressed in government-private collaborations.
Yeah, great. So really the balance between focused programs, how to scale them, and then the roadmap between the two. So I think we only have a few minutes left, so we're going to try to take a question from the Slido. Hopefully people have been submitting questions. I don't know if we're going to be able to see the questions up here. Key challenge of scale up. So you touched about that a little bit in relation to the partnership, but I think we have here some different, some companies that are more established have been quite active all over the region, other companies that are younger. So maybe for some, we can just talk about a little bit on the challenge of scale up, either in the early stages or as you're expanding regionally or trying to really increase your reach to the base of the pyramid.
Well, we started out as a distribution company, and we were just delivering vaccines to the doctors and clinics in the beginning. So we're now trying to scale up into manufacturing, and that's a huge lift. And the challenge in that is primarily getting, of course, the approval of the government, and then mostly funding, because now we are doing bigger things rather than the smaller distribution company that we are before. So those are our bigger challenges right now is to be able to fund the bigger project.
Kelvin?
I think it's the same thing for us. A lot of the farmers, they're very aspirational. They want to get certified. They want to access new markets. They keep asking me, if I plant 10 times more crops, can I sell? Can you buy from me? I think being able to provide financing to these farmers will be key to lift them up through this cycle. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's just being able to give them access to these funds would enable them to invest in infrastructure, build greenhouses, get better value for their products, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, so we see whether it's financing for the business or financing for the farmers themselves, always a challenge.
Of course, financing is also one of the challenges, but also one of the key challenges that we face in scaling up is actually changing the mindset also of our farmers, making them more conscious about quality, that they, it's not the quantity of seeds that produce, but actually they have to conform to certain quality standards. So developing their skills and, making their minds more open to, quality standards.
Just to add to it, I think all these points are very relevant, and I think that the general, for any business scaling up, it requires a level of organizational maturity, right? You need a depth in your management in order to operationally keep control and keep quality in all these remote locations. And if you work in a developing country with sometimes challenging, there could be peace and order issues, there could be issues around communication, where infrastructure you cannot reach people. But at the same time, you want to keep, a control, and you want to have a quality of management, within the organization. That is an interesting challenge to manage.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. I think it's about time, being told we have to wrap up. So I'd just like everyone to join me in thanking our panelists for giving us a bit of insight on their models and the challenges that they've faced and how partnerships have helped. Thanks.
Thank you very much once again to our panelists, Mr. Giovanni Alingog, Mr. Kelvin Nag, Ms. Mary Ann Sayok, and Mr. Simon Backer, together with our moderator, Ms. Kathleen Mignano. We shall now proceed to a discussion on inclusive business financing. To facilitate the discussion, please put your hands together for Principal Investment Specialist, Asian Development Bank, Ms. Pamela Bracey.
Thank you very much. It's truly a pleasure to be here today. From the last session that we've just heard, one of the key concerns in looking at inclusive business is the question of financing for inclusive business. So today's afternoon session will give a little bit more. We have several people that are going to give us a few more insights into how we can finance inclusive business. But before we introduce our panelists, I would like to mention again, so that we can get your most pertinent questions, that if you can go to Slido and enter the event passcode, #inclusive, that as part of the question and answer part of this session, we will be able to get your top thoughts. Our panelists today include Ms. Riko Ishikawa. She's the global head of the inclusive business team at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. We also have Mr. Martin Lemoyne, who is the unit head for the Food and Agribusiness Investment unit at ADB's Private Sector Operations Department. And we also have Ms. Letitia Lena, who is the Vice President of Corporate Citizenship for Asia Pacific at Credit Suisse. So we'd like to thank very much all of you for joining, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you. With you. Thank you very much in having some comments in terms of the Inclusive Business Program at IFC and the methods for providing financing to inclusive business.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank every one of you for being here. This is such an exciting event to be part of this ASEAN IB Summit. And my name is Eriko, and I'm from the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. So to tell you the truth, this label, inclusive business, it's something that development bankers and people who are interested in development has created. Because there are many ways that businesses actually do help develop the economies and integrate with the poor, but a business probably wouldn't have never come up with this idea. And there are other labels that we also hear. Shared value, we hear about impact investment. But at the crux of the reason why we chose inclusive business is because you have to have a business model. It has to really empower the low-income populations and communities. And there's only two ways to do it. You either get them more income, and we saw a lot of the value chain work in agriculture, so that the farmers, through cooperatives and through all the training, they can get more income. Or you are able to offer services to low-income people that are more affordable so that it costs less. It's really basic. It's like for all of us. You have to make more money and you have to make economies, the prices have to be fair. So IFC has been doing this probably during the 60 years that we've been around. But it's only more recently that we kind of decided, let's look at the business models that really are working. So we took stock, and since about 2005, we've been investing $1 billion in businesses. And by now, it's $16 billion in 500 companies all over the globe. So it really does exist. And it is something that businesses are doing because most of our clients are local companies. They can be small, medium, large, they're local companies. And for them, the challenges are to really work with the whole population, and most of the population are low income. So the facts are that we provide debt, equity, all kinds of different types of financing. But we also have a very interesting group that does venture capital type financing. So we have early stage money that can go smaller. Those are the ones that do fintech, they do health, education, things that are a little bit more kind of early stage. But the majority of what we do is really with companies that have been established and that want to really just replicate what they have been doing, maybe in a different part of the country, maybe in a different country. And that's the bulk of the businesses that we do. In terms of the ASEAN countries, in the last 10 years, we invested $2 billion in inclusive businesses. The overall kind of types of businesses in the ASEAN has been from manufacturing to do lenses for low-income markets. This is for eye care. We also have affordable housing as one area, a very important sector, and quite often mobile service type provision. That's one of the things that we have been quite strong on. So the key for why we really have put so much emphasis on inclusive business is that the goal for the World Bank Group is that we really need to end poverty and really boost shared prosperity. So we want to make sure that as the country grows, that the people who are at the base of the pyramid are not left behind. And to do that, we have to just not do the financing part, but we also have to do technical assistance. We have to work with our clients. And for that, we get donor funding to be able to do a lot of work with farmers, with income segmentation, trying to figure out what are the parts that really make a big difference in farmers' lives. We have done quite a lot of work also with the health education. What are the impacts on the people's lives once they have gotten the services that the companies we invest in provide? So to us, monitoring the impacts, the outcomes is also very, very important. And when I think of the areas that are most important for IFC is that we look at every project for the environmental, social, and governance point of view. A project has to be meeting all the criteria, because otherwise it will not be a sustainable project. And the hurdles are very high. And some of our clients even tell us that, you know, we really suffered to be able to get their money. But in the end, we became the benchmark for the sector that we are in. This was a CEO in an agribusiness company. And he said that what was good for their company, they were the first ones to do it. So they had this kind of competitive edge vis-a-vis other companies. Now, one area that IFC has really supported recently is to talk at such illustrious meetings like, you know, ASEAN. We started out working together with a G20. We did a G20 competition on inclusive business when the Mexicans had the presidency. And since then, we've been very much engaged in creating a framework that is not just an IFC framework, but it's a framework that others can adopt. We also realize that we have the ability to finance projects, but the policy side is something that is very important. And we team up with others to be able to do the policy work. We teamed up with UNDP, and under the G20, we created a platform to really address the policymakers. It's called the G20 Global Platform on Inclusive Business. And of course, more and more with a sister bank, the World Bank, we are looking at how can we really create markets by opening up the policy dialogue for specific types of projects. I would say that health, education, agribusiness are all areas that have a lot of government interactions, and the governments can facilitate many things. So those are the areas that we are working with policymakers through the World Bank and also through our other development finance institutions, where we have to say, look, in these areas, we really need to ask the government to help us. One of the key things that we found out is that there is no such thing as an inclusive business bureau in any of the governments, because it cuts across agriculture, health, tourism. It's many different sectors. So one key that we found out that worked in the Philippines is to have a champion. And so we are always looking for a champion. The person who is a champion for the Philippines knows who she is. But it is important to find somebody in the government that believes in this inclusive business concept and who's willing to really champion it. Otherwise, it takes many different departments. So I think that's the one thing that I'd like to end is that, yes, we have the money, yes, we can finance, but we need to work with all partners to be able to get more. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. In terms of understanding some of the attributes of the IFC's Inclusive Business Program, I'd like to turn now to Martin Lemoyne of ADB and some insight into the unit that he heads.
Thank you, Pam. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martin Lemoyne from the Asian Development Bank. As you know, ADB is 50-year-old this year. And it's fair to say that ADB has always been an impact investor. Our mission is to, similar to the World Bank, to eradicate poverty. So this is at the core of our existence as a provider of finance and investment. However, the traditional challenge for this historically has been government. So funding infrastructure, social services through government. And still today, this is still 80% of the 17 billion that ADB is providing every year. But although infrastructure is essential, I think many countries realize that it is not enough. Countries need a competitive, productive private sector. I would add internationally competitive. You need companies that are able to compete internationally, have the right standards to be able to create sustainable jobs. So only the private sector can create jobs sustainably, create wealth and jobs for the poor. So to me, this inclusive business discussion is mainly about private sector and business. This is, I hope, the understanding. And as Eriko mentioned, inclusive business is about essentially good businesses that are catering to the needs of the bottom of the pyramid through relevant products and services, or that simply employ people, poor people, or include them in their value chain. So this is the definition. And just to give a few examples of what ADB has been doing in that field, it's a small part of our activity. It's about 500 million out of 17 billion, but it's very meaningful and growing. 3 examples. One is in Bhutan. We invested $3 million only in a company that will work with 15,000 small farmers, help them grow hazelnut trees for export. So that's one example. We did that investment with AFC, by the way. Another example in India, we supported a company called Simpa that is installing solar panels for households that have no connection to the grid. So again, a private sector solution to a market failure because no grid, no electricity. So these households are able to get electricity without upfront payment because they will just pay as you go from their mobile phone. So very innovative, very scalable type of investment. Finally, an example in ASEAN. We supported last year a flower company in Vietnam. Beautiful company, 3,000 employees, mainly women, 60% women, a lot from minorities, from ethnic minorities. And still, that company is the first taxpayer and the first social security contributor in their province of Vietnam. So this leads me to an important point. Inclusive business is also about very good corporate governance practices and playing by the rules. If you're an investor, if you're a business in an emerging markets and you play by the rules, you're a good corporate citizen, it's fair to say that you're likely to be an inclusive business because you're already doing the right things. So this is the type of businesses that as ADB and I think IFC as well, we would like to support. And I want to conclude saying that we are open for business, so I'm happy to talk to any of the companies here and to take any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That gives us a little bit of insight into two development agencies. Now we'd like to hear from Credit Suisse in terms of what efforts they're making for inclusive business.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Letitia from Credit Suisse, and I'm working in the corporate citizenship team, which is the equivalent of CSR for Credit Suisse, covering the Asia-Pacific region. So as you may know, beyond its core funding, core banking activities, Credit Suisse is committed to supporting inclusive growth and businesses through, among others, impact investment and corporate citizenship. So one concrete example of the way we support the IB ecosystem is a partnership that we started with ADB 4 years ago. So through that partnership, we've been providing different technical assistance, including the facilitation of a workshop that was held in Manila 2 years ago, or last year, I think. So the objective of that workshop was to raise awareness of local bankers on inclusive businesses and also helping them assess the risk related with those deals. Another activity that we've funded through the partnership with ADB is also placing Credit Suisse employees in a few businesses supported by ADB and also in ADB. So among this employee placement is part of the Global Citizens Program, which consists of short-term placement. And we had, I think, 4 different staff working directly with companies based in India, 1 in Indonesia, and the 3 other staff work directly with ADB. So another important contribution to the IB is obviously the impact investment. So the Credit Suisse has been a leading innovator and strongly engaged in impact investment since 2002. And this year marks actually the 15th anniversary of our contribution to microfinance and impact investment. So as part of the impact investment, we support a wide range of sectors, including microfinance, agriculture, conservation, and education. So a concrete example of what we've been doing in education, in the education sector, is the higher education notes that we launched in 2014 with Prodigy Finance. So through those higher education notes, we helped over 4,000 students from underprivileged background accessing loans in order to fund their higher education. Another flagship impact investment product that I wanted to highlight today is the Asian Impact Investment Fund that we launched in 2015 in partnership with UOB Venture Management. So this is a unique fund that invests in businesses that seek to improve the livelihoods of people living at the bottom of the pyramid by engaging them as either consumers, employees, retailers, or suppliers. So that fund achieved a final close of $55 million last year. And as of August of this year, 40% of that capital had been invested in 7 different companies based in China, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So the Asian Impact Investment Fund also contributes to a wide range of sectors. So just to give you an example, the Chinese company in which we invested is a leading domestic manufacturer in producing nutritional supplements for malnourished infants in China. And in Vietnam, one of the investees is a company producing organic fertilizers. So let me finish with a few words on what we do in terms of corporate citizenship. So we mainly support projects run by non-profit organizations in the microfinance and education sector. And we do this through financial grants, but also through employee placement. In terms of microfinance, we specifically focus on organizations that develop financial products and services in sectors such as agriculture, education and housing, and we also strongly support organizations that develop products specifically for women. And with respect to education, we have a global education initiative that is managed by the HQ office in Zurich, Switzerland. So that global program mainly focuses on girls and young women, and it funds programs that deliver life skills and financial education. So in the Asia Pacific, we also have a separate grant portfolio that focuses on the education sector. So right now we have over 10 different grantees that provide disadvantaged children and youth with access to quality education. And one of our main priorities is also to fund projects that deliver vocational training programs as well as job placement, because we do think it's a key gap that really needs to be addressed in that region. And last but not least, we also strongly support partners that include some projects or that run some projects as social enterprises, meaning that they decrease their dependence on traditional donors and eventually improve their financial sustainability.
Thank you very much. In addition to our panelists here, we have a fourth panelist who unfortunately could not join us in person, but he does have a video, and his name is David Gallipo. He's the chief of the United Nations Social Impact Fund, and we do have a video from him now.
From outer space, astronauts say that our world looks fragile and lonely, with soft white clouds covering the blue globe. But taking a closer look, the fingerprints of mankind's rapid expansion on our planet appear, an interconnected world that fuels increasingly complex challenges. Climate change, urbanization, poverty, threats to health and to human security. Unfair distribution of benefits caused by unequal access to human rights affect people all around the world. From all the way down here, what can be done? How can we continue to grow and at the same time spark real change? The Sustainable Development Goals have been set, but now it's time to get to work. The United Nations Social Impact Fund is a new multi-partner financial and capacity building platform that bridges entrepreneurship, social innovation, and blended capital to create sustainable economic and social returns. Our goal is to support and scale up these businesses to create bigger impact. The UNDP Social Impact Fund combines grant, debt, and equity into blended financing for SDG-aligned investments. Infrastructure plays an important role in development. Better infrastructure boosts connectivity and enhances efficiency, growth of business, trade and commerce across borders. But the World Economic Forum estimated a global infrastructure gap of $1 trillion per year. A huge funding gap. And when it comes to green infrastructure, the gap widens even further. But the world needs to move to renewable energy infrastructure and sustainable transportation to fight climate change. Technology can help us in creating solutions. By 2015, between 15 and 25 billion devices have connected to the internet, which enables the connection of people, processes, and data. IT solutions can solve real-world problems by generating data, processing analysis, and creating results that can improve people's lives. From data mining to virtual reality, from artificial intelligence to advanced satellite imageries, from robotics to drones, technology continues to evolve, and its ability to affect positive change has grown exponentially. We've seen applications in areas of much relevance to society, such as health, education, and disaster response. The UN Social Impact Fund is building the networks to act as a catalyst for the global movement of social impact. The new partnership architecture fosters collaboration amongst governments, businesses, investors, and philanthropists. Now is the time for all of us to work together for real sustainable change. not only to survive, but also to thrive.
Thank you very much. Now we have I guess, our question and answer session. A couple of questions just in terms of everyone's discussion, and I guess this may be more directed towards IFC and ADB. But what would be some of the criteria for financing? I'm sure there are many companies that are interested in perhaps approaching us for how we would go about the process.
Sure, thank you so much. So we invest in almost every sector. So the key thing is to have a business model that's robust, that the cash flow of the project will be able to meet, if it's a debt investment, the debt obligations, and if it's equity, that we really see a substantial gain, that we would like to be able to have an exit. So it's very broad. It has to make business sense. It has to have a development impact. Especially if it's going to be considered an inclusive business project, we have to really see how either the farmers are going to be part of the value chain and how the product is going to be distributed and made affordable. So there are a lot of hurdles, but a very good business plan with the financials. And most of the time we do not invest in very early stage companies except for our venture capital team. So we need the company that has at least 3 to 4 years of, very good results. It seems very broad, but you can go on our website and we actually have, all of that information.
Martin?
Yeah, so essentially we have the same criteria. I would add, of course, there needs to be a clear development impact, clearly on job creation or providing food security, food safety, or social services. Commitment to comply with corporate governance, environmental and social standards. It's very important for both IFC and ADB. But one point I would like to stress is the quality of the management and the ownership. We are looking for companies where there is a clear commitment to not only run a business very professionally, but also to achieve this development impact that they need to believe in. And one hope here I found is this new generation that we call millennials. So none of us represent that generation because we are all born before 1981. But these millennials that are born and grew up in the age of internet, they are really committed to impact. And you see that a lot in the business schools. And you see that a lot as well in the change of generation in family businesses in Asia. This new generation is not only interested in money, but they want to create impact. And I think as investors, we need to support, we need to identify them, help them invest, support them, attract them to places like the Philippines. And I think if we do that, we will probably achieve very good results.
Thank you very much. Actually, turning to one of the questions that we have on Slido, it says, do you have a special financing program targeting women-owned or women-led inclusive businesses? And I guess this would speak not only to ADB and IFC, but also in the Credit Suisse partnership or any of these sub-programs targeting women.
Okay, so at IFC, we actually do have a program, and we team up with banks. So what we do is we lend to a bank that is willing to have an SME credit line that's really targeted to women entrepreneurs. So these are women-owned or women-led. And what happened was, and I remember the first few that we did, it was in Africa, and we realized that there's so many good businesses run by women, but the banks, local banks, were not lending to women, or they had to get their husbands to guarantee the loan. So we did a whole technical assistance program where we increased the capacity of these banks and the loan officers to be able to really look at the business and not discriminate against the businesses owned by women. So that was very successful, so we continued doing that in many other regions. And to this day, we continue doing it, and I'm going to plug a bond that we have issued. It's called a social bond, and the social bond includes inclusive businesses. The proceeds of the bonds can be used for inclusive business loans or towards the SME credit lines for women. And this is something that we hope is going to be like the green bond. The social bonds will become a new product that all the banks will be issuing, and the proceeds will go towards inclusive business or women-led business loans.
So I'd like to add, like for ADB, gender equality is really top of the agenda. We have something called gender mainstreaming, so there should be gender equality element in all our projects across infrastructure, finance, agribusiness. So we are pushing all our clients, being government or private sector, very hard to push for greater gender equality. It's not always easy because, you know, of course, it creates a debate, you know. So some clients say you're being so unfair to the men because we always want to push higher targets for women. But at the same time, you know, it's a very healthy debate to have. And you always find very concrete, actionable items to push for. You know, I won't go into the details, but if you look at a specific operation, there is always something specific to be done. Like, for example, in the flower farms that we finance in Vietnam, we pushed the company to commit that women will not be involved in spraying the chemical pesticides, which could be very harmful, especially for pregnant women. So that you always find a very specific item to where you can push the agenda.
Yeah, so just a few words. At Credit Suisse, we don't have a special product focusing on women. Having said that, obviously, we do take into consideration gender impact. So if I just go back to the example I provided on this Chinese investee, obviously the provision of these nutritional supplements for the malnourished infants, you know, will have a positive impact on women. And in terms of corporate citizenship, I've also highlighted the fact that women are really a key focus as part of the global education program. So we do a lot of things also in terms of...
I guess one more question that would like to ask, and it touched upon an area that IFC mentioned, is digital finance or fintech. And I guess that's an area that is having an impact in a variety of different aspects of how we look at overall financing. But in terms of inclusive business, is digital finance or fintech having an impact in terms of how we look at that?
Very much so. I think that in the areas that has grown recently has been fintech. And we have been very early proponents of many of the systems that now exist and everybody takes for granted. I'll highlight one company from Bangladesh called bKash. And basically they were able to grow the ability of the non-banked low-income people to have access to financial services. So this is something where people with low income don't have bank accounts, but most of them have a cell phone now. Once the cell phones became cheaper, many of the models that we looked at, and it's funny because the most famous model is from Kenya and it's called M-Pesa. But M-Pesa was not replicated for many years because the reason why it was successful was because the regulators had fallen asleep on the job and they had allowed the telecommunications company to really go into finance. But as soon as that happened, all the regulators became much more savvy. So one thing that bKash did that was very smart was to partner with a bank so that they actually went through and did everything as if it were a financial institution. So those are the areas that there's still quite a lot of growth potential. We believe in our venture capital area, and they are really looking into it. Yeah.
Has digital finance played a role in any of the projects that ADB has worked on?
Well, beyond the fintech, I think technology is creating a huge impact. And to me, as I said, inclusive business is about good corporate governance, good corporate citizenship. So technology has the potential to increase transparency. for example, transparency in the value chain. We mentioned that good inclusive business, they get rid of the middlemen and access directly to the farmers to share more values to the farmers. If you add the technology on top of this, you will increase transparency and you will make market more efficient. So there is hope again, but again, who will bring this technology? Who will bring this innovation? You need the young generation, you need the millennials to come, invest, live, work in those countries.
And we have one last question that comes from Slido. And actually, I apologize, I forgot my glasses, so I'm not able to read off the small monitor. But it says, one question is, how do you guard against investment losses due to integrity and corruption issues? Which is a very important question. I know both IFC and ADB, as well as Credit Suisse, have specific guidelines on corruption, but I guess it's a question of how does that play through on the implementation of actual projects.
I'll be happy to answer that because there's a whole area in IFC that just takes care of the integrity and really looking at the background of the people involved in any project. And it's so clear-cut that, for example, I used to do some work in Central Asia, and if a company had people on the board that were related to the president of that country, most of the time we could not do that project. It was very clear-cut, and as an investment officer, you were told you cannot do that. And there's a reason, because you don't want to be in a company where there's some aspects of the company that once the regime changes, all of a sudden the company is no longer viable. So we're very careful on the integrity and really looking at the background. And now we have a whole system in place that it's a separate area. It's not the investment area. It's a separate area, just like risk is different, credit, it's separate. So it is every single project goes through that kind of very, very rigorous testing. I'm sure ADB does the same thing.
So you protect, as an investor, you will protect yourself through very good due diligence. So it's a due diligence question. If something happens later, post due diligence, there is not much you can do. I mean, you may be ready to, you may have to be ready to lose money. But I guess the question this raises is, in some countries we can barely touch any company because, because of the political setup. So the question is, what do you do for the poor people that live in that country? So it creates a bit interesting discussion. You still need to engage, right? You cannot completely leave this country aside. So I think this is an area where we have also to be more involved. We have to be more involved, work with the government, work with the private sector to push for good practices, good corporate governance.
Yeah, I mean, at Credit Suisse, it's obviously the same. There is a strong risk assessment process that is part of any pre-investment decision. And we have different teams that are really supporting the impact investment team in terms of anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and so on. So.
Well, thank you very much for all of your insights on financing. If anyone has any further questions, please look at the IFC or ADB's or Credit Suisse's websites, and we can find out more about the partnership program, as well as the inclusive business programs and further details on financing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much once again to our panelists, Ms. Eriko Ishikawa, Mr. Martin Lemoine, Ms. Leticia Ligna, and of course our moderator, Ms. Pamela Bracey. Our final session focuses on enabling inclusive business through policy, with government leaders as panelists. Please welcome our moderator for this session, Canada's ambassador to ASEAN, Ms. Marie-Louise Hanan.
Hello and good afternoon, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, ministers. It's really my pleasure to be here representing the Canadian Mission to ASEAN. I'm normally based in Jakarta. My name is Marie-Louise Hannon, and it's such a pleasure to be doing this, especially during this year, the 40th anniversary of Canada-ASEAN Dialogue Partner Relations. So the last panel today is entitled Enabling Inclusive Business Through Policy. And I really hope that it will be an engaging session and one that people will feel free to join in on, because having an interactive session will make it all that much more interesting. You will have noticed in the last panels that there is this system going called Slido, and they tell me that anybody who goes onto the website, slido.com, is very welcome to enter the event passcode, #inclusive, go to the Q&A, the polling display, tap on this session, this panel, and enter your question, click send. So in that way, we can try to answer and address some of the questions in the Q&A session near the end. That will make it all that much more interesting for, I think, our honorable guests and our ministers and so on. But to give you a little bit of food for thought, just before we ask the ministers to come on stage, I think we should go back to the definition that was agreed on for this discussion for the entire day on inclusive business. I'm told that the ASEAN inclusive business definition references the definition that was agreed upon by the G20, and I'll just read that. It's a private sector approach to providing goods, services, and livelihoods on a commercially viable basis, either at scale or scalable, to people living at the base of the economic pyramid, making them part of the value chain of companies' core business as suppliers, distributors, retailers, or customers. And what I take from this definition is that at the very heart of this definition is people. I think that's what we're here for. That's what the ministers of the various countries are here to serve. And so I think that'll be an interesting way to focus our discussion. So without further ado, I am very, very honored to be able to invite to the stage our panelists. First, His Excellency Ramon M. Lopez, Secretary of the Department of Trade and Industry of the Republic of Philippines, and of course, who is also our host for today, so thank you very much, Secretary Lopez. Also, His Excellency Pak Enga Lukita, Minister of the Ministry of Trade, Republic of Indonesia. Pak Enga, please. His Excellency Dato Sri Mustafa Mohamed, the Minister, Ministry of International Trade and Industry from Malaysia, and His Excellency Tran Quoc Khan, Deputy Minister, Minister of Industry and Trade, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Thank you very much. Switching positions here, I would like to invite first Secretary Lopez to please provide your remarks to the audience.
Okay. Hello and good afternoon again. Let me just say at the onset that in ASEAN we have adopted really the spirit of being people-centered, being people-oriented community. We recognize that about 1/2 of the ASEAN population would still be part of what we call the poor segment of society. And that's the reason why having models like inclusive business as part of an additional model that can be adopted, especially by bigger companies, is one that will help really bring down the gains of development to a wider base, especially reaching out to the bottom of the pyramid, or what we call base of the pyramid as well. Definitely, discussions on IB really leads into an appreciation that at the end of the day, all these commercial transactions, being in business, it's not all about profit, it's not all about money. There is an emerging awareness and consciousness that doing good is good business as well. And that's the reason why even whenever I face, again, groups of big corporations, I always challenge them and ask them, what is your IB model, inclusive business model? They're actually around us, but maybe from a, from a number of, let's say, 100 companies, maybe about 10 to 20% would just be probably practicing it, and the rest would have the standard business model. But to the extent that we are able to showcase also successful IB models, it becomes more bankable. The previous panel and they've discussed it, that to a certain extent the IB models does not mean that it's a losing proposition. It's really a model that is profitable, and in the end would be a win-win and mutually beneficial to both the big companies and the suppliers, mostly micro SMEs, farmers, cooperatives, and what we have there would be empowering models that really would be reducing inequality at the end of the day. Two ways of addressing it. I mentioned the top-down approach, which is gaining awareness and pushing for greater awareness of IB models from bigger companies. But at the same time, there should be a bottom-up approach in terms of enabling also those at the base of the pyramid to be empowered, to be competitive, to be able to face the requirements and be part of the value chain of the bigger companies. By that, we mean enabling them, teaching them, mentoring, providing them microfinancing, giving them machines and equipment, and making them really productive and competitive so that they can really supply the requirements of bigger companies. And because supplying them should not be at all cost. They will be buying from you not because you are a micro and small, but they should be buying from you because you are also a competitive supplier at the end of the day. What we probably an immediate gain, and I would say mutually beneficial, is you're removing the middleman, wherein you are basically directing and connecting the small guys with the big guys, so the big guys would be getting it at a lower cost compared to if they source it from a middleman, and at the same time, the supplier will be able to sell it at a higher price compared to selling it to a middleman. So to me, and I guess to many, would realize that it's a win-win approach. This is very consistent with the program that we have under the current administration of President Duterte, which is really bringing prosperity for all, widening the gains of development, and reducing inequality, recognizing that still we have to address the concerns, the difficulties, challenges faced by those at the base of the pyramid. One of the key socio-economic agenda, actually, as part of the policy, is this rural and value chain development. And we create a policy environment that will really promote IB models. In fact, as a policy move, we've included it in our investment priorities plan, which is a plan that is issued every 3 years, including and identifying industries, projects that would be entitled to fiscal incentives. So fiscal incentives would mean income tax holidays for 4 years. If you're pioneering, it could be as much as 6 years. And for those that will be registered in the IB project, they will be entitled to 5 years. It's for the first time included in the IPP, signed by the President Duterte, about 2-3 months ago. So it's really new. We hope that there will be more registration under that segment, and we are still doing the road shows right now to improve the awareness of its inclusion, the inclusion of IB in the IPP. And at the same time, I mentioned about enabling the small guys. We're very much into development and the teaching, the mentoring, the provision of microfinance, provision of market access to the micro SME sector. In fact, we mentioned that connecting them with the big companies is in a way a market access for them, a sustainable one. a continuing market opportunity for them to allow them to grow along the way. And that is very important as we teach the suppliers, the small farmers and cooperatives on how they can continuously improve their business model, improve productivity, lower costs, and so on and so forth. So that intervention is being applied for micro SMEs, for agri-processing, farmers and cooperatives. So we have this commitment to push further these types of program. And at the ASEAN level, again, since 1/2 of the population would still be in what we call the poor segment, there is now a growing sentiment among us that we should be including more and more, I guess, projects that will promote IB, and it could be a cross-country IB model that we can think of, like a small supplier from one country, putting them in the regional value chain, allowing him or her or that company to supply, another company, a bigger company in another ASEAN country. So these are possible opportunities, programs that we can adopt along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Lopez. Very interesting remarks, and I think unlocking the potential of intra-regional trade is something that we talk about a lot in the economic community within ASEAN, and if we can get that right, we know that there's a lot of gains to be enjoyed. Please, Pak Engga from Indonesia, if you want to provide your remarks.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to you all, and thank you, Ambassador Hanan, for inviting me to inform to the forum on what we are doing in Indonesia to promote inclusive business. But first, let me inform the forum that we did have a financial inclusion task force under the previous government, but there is no the so-called inclusive business task force in Indonesia as yet. What we have is an ad hoc group of officials working together with IB champions to look into a more structured way of promoting inclusive business, both from the government and private sector standpoints. Having said that, inclusive business in Indonesia was first promoted by larger companies in many sectors in Indonesia. In agro-based sectors such as rubber, cocoa, paper, tea, vanilla, and palm oil, the focus has been on the BOP in rural areas, some of which are in remote areas that can be reached only through high seas. We could also see IB is being promoted in manufacturing sectors, such as electronics, rattan furniture, and herbal. In services sectors to include tourism, marketing, as well as application-based services, such as Gojek, the competitor of Uber in Indonesia, but with a wider scope of business. What we learned from rather limited experience on promoting IB is that while business plays a major, if not key role in advancing inclusive business, government should do its part to promote awareness and to create an enabling environment for the development of different models and sizes of IB activities. In this regard, the government of Indonesia has been giving special focus on one of major challenges identified by G20 Global Platform on Inclusive Business. That is lack of financing. This is an immediate task to be addressed in the short term. To address this issue, the government of Indonesia has been active in promoting the development of mobile applications to, for example, allow more BOP and small medium enterprises access to low-cost financing. Other creative ways of providing financial supports to BOP have also been explored and introduced, including low-interest credit for small farmers, small fishermen, as well as their respective cooperatives. On a longer term, the government is looking at promoting collaborative approach to combine inclusive business models with corporate social responsibility, or CSR programs. Of course, they are different as they depart from different theses, but they have the potentials to reinforce each other to realize their common objective of empowering the communities. Indonesia has a CSR law mandating large companies to invest 2% of their pre-tax profits into activities with benefits to poor people and the environment. Business and government are now considering how to promote CSR more strategically in tandem with IB. Government will continue working on the regulatory environment to promote IB program and activities. Priority sectors in the near future will be on labor-intensive ones, such as agriculture, fishery, and some manufacturing industries, to provide much stronger safety nets in time of global uncertainties. At the same time, government provides an environment for firms and the BOP community to capitalize on the era of Internet of Things. In some areas, sector-specific approaches might be more appropriate than general approach. But in either case, the government keeps focus on areas or sectors and not on specific firms or companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pak. May I now ask Dato Sri from Malaysia, Mr. Pak?
Thank you, Ambassador Hanan, distinguished panelists, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, of course, IB is a very important agenda for all of us in ASEAN. It goes without saying. We all agree on that. From our perspective, it is very important to have an end-to-end solution, meaning in terms of capacity building, it's very important for us to outreach programs are very important for us in Malaysia. We go out to the field, to the ground. We ministers go down and meet people and tell them what we have for them. And in doing so, of course, it's important to have an end-to-end solution. Capacity building funding, mentioned by both Minister Ramon and also Minister Engar, is very important. And when it comes to funding, in Malaysia we have programs to provide guarantees provided by the government and the central bank. A large portion of small loans given to SMEs, for example, is been guaranteed by the government. So training, of course, is important. Outreach programs are important because some of them are not aware of the programs. And Minister Ramon spoke about registration and licensing. It is important for them to be brought into the formal sector. It's easier for government to provide help to them if they are part of the formal sector. So for us, we think probably about 20% of these small businesses are not registered. And we have gone round throughout the country to encourage them free of charge, online registration. This has been quite successful, and we hope going forward we'll be able to get them to be registered as proper businesses. So these are some basic things: outreach, end-to-end solution, providing guarantees for small loans. And when it comes to loans, of course, some are through the banking system. This is where the guarantees come in. Some have been funded directly by the government. I think in terms of funding, there's no lack of schemes in Malaysia. In some cases, of course, it is awareness. That's one part of it. The other is, which both my colleagues spoke about, how to bring, and you yourself, Ambassador Hanan, how to bring them into the global value chain. That's the difficult part. And we do have program for women, for example, focusing on women entrepreneurs to enter the export market, to penetrate the overseas market, dedicated programs for women. We have programs on e-commerce, where SMEs are trained how to be part of the e-commerce platform. And this is going on quite well. And we actually go around throughout the country to train some SMEs. There's been some success stories, farmers selling seaweeds, earning a small amount of money After they've been put on the platform, the income's multiplied by 10, 20 times. And farmers selling fruits become part of the global supply chain. And we have success stories of Muslim women selling Muslim costumes, penetrating the American market, the Saudi Arabian market. And some of them have been successful without any help from government, and some of them, of course, have been successful with a lot of help from government. Overall, I think, having said all that, I think it's important to have a blueprint or master plan, which ASEAN has. What ASEAN has done is to integrate all the master plans coming from, all our countries, putting together all the master plans. It's not only having a master plan, but for us it is important to make sure that we follow up on that master plan. We have a system of keeping track of achievements, the KPI, the key performance indicators, what is being applied in the private sector for so many years has been applied in government in the last 10 years, where there's regular tracking. We have vision, we have targets, for example, for exports. SMEs, we're now about 18% of the total exports of the country. We want to move to 20, 30. Employment, we are, about 35. GDP, about 35%. So for GDP, for example, we want to move from 35 to 40% of GDP. We have those targets in our master plan, but what's important is to keep track to make sure that those targets are achieved. And for that, we have a regular monitoring process. Once every 6 months, of course, once a year, we monitor, we evaluate, how far we've been successful in meeting the targets that are contained in the master plan. So those are some basic things we're doing. I think it's important to go back to the basics. Simple things like outreach, I think it is very important because many people there, women or single mothers, for example, or young people, they're not aware of what's going on. Although we are modern, many of us have access, we all smartphones, many of us, but we have to acknowledge the fact that out there, there's quite a big chunk of people, a large percentage of people who are not aware of the various facilities that we can offer to them. So thank you so much. That's some perspective from the Malaysian side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dato Sri Mustafa. I hope that people are thinking of their questions and submitting them via the Sligo website, because I have thought of many questions. I think we're going to have a very stimulating discussion, but your questions are also very welcome. And now I will call upon Vice Minister Khan. Please give us your perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Hannah. And first of all, I would like to convey to you the sincere apologies of my minister. He regrets that he is not able to come here today due to an urgent assignment at home. So I represent him here today, and I will talk about the Grow Asia program in Vietnam. As you may already know, the Grow Asia Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture is a multi-stakeholder program established by WEF in collaboration with the ASEAN Secretariat to bring together the small farmers, the companies, the governments, the NGOs, the various stakeholders in order to help the small farmers to improve their production and livelihood through access to knowledge, market information, and finance. And the partnership aims to reach 10 million stakeholders, smallholders, farmers by 2020, helping them to increase the productivity and then the sustainability and profitability by around 20% by 2020. In Vietnam, it was launched in 2010 as a public-private task force on sustainable agriculture growth, and then renamed as a Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture in Vietnam. We call that the PSAV in 2015. The PSAV in Vietnam is chaired by our Minister of Agriculture and co-chaired by Director General of the company named Yara Vietnam. And the PSAV goal is to increase income for farmers, as well as promote sustainable agriculture development through investment attraction, technology upgrading, and agricultural management, agricultural market expansion, and various things. As you know that we have institutionalized the activities of PSAV. We have the chairman, like I said, the Minister of Agriculture and co-chaired by a company. And then we have the 9 working group. We call that the public partnership, public-private partnership working group. We have the working group in tea, co-chaired by a Department of Agriculture Ministry and Nestle. And we have the working group also on other products as well, like vegetable and fruits and coffee, for example. And the partnership comprises of over 60 partners from global and local companies, including the big names that I mentioned, like Cargill from the US, and then Metro Cash and Carry from European Union, and then Monsanto US, including Nestle and Unilever. We also have the provincial governments participated, national research institutes, international organizations, and NGO. The PSAV task force, the working groups focuses on a number of crops, namely, like I said, coffee, tea, vegetable and fruits, seafood, pepper, and etc. We have the 9 working groups like that. And the PSAV involves not only private sector and government agencies, NGOs, but also the research institutes in Vietnam, farmers association, and of course smallholder farmers into various production. And we do have the very big success over years in Vietnam. Now they're operating for 2 years, and everybody seems to be happy with the program.
Okay, thank you very much. So that concludes the prepared remarks, and now we'll go into some Q&A. I see one question coming in so far, but we will have a few questions generated here. One thing that I've remarked is that a common thread across the region seems to be the centrality of agriculture as one sector that inclusive business models are being tried in. And I'm just going to open up to anybody who might wish to answer. It's obvious from Grow Asia, where Canada is also proud to be one of the public sector partners of this important initiative. But in the other countries, why agriculture? Why does that represent a promising sector for trying inclusive business models? Is it simply because you've got a large group of people, or can you include people from different parts of society? Why agriculture? Perhaps Secretary?
Well, maybe common to all our countries would be basically the characteristic that most of our economies are agricultural based, or must have started from agriculture. And over like 60% of the economy, like in the Philippines, would be attributable to agriculture sector, both at the production, and if we are to include also the ancillary industries, no? So that's a big part of our economy, and therefore addressing the economic concerns in the agriculture sector would be primordial, a very important concern. In other words, if you have a poor, underdeveloped agriculture sector, then that would be reflected in the level of incomes of farmers, and therefore more farmers in the bottom of the pyramid, in the base of the pyramid. So therefore, any effort that can really uplift the quality of life in the farming sector and fisheries and all that would be a big boost to the incomes of those at the bottom of the pyramid, mostly composed of those in the agriculture sector. And so agriculture modernization, empowering farmers with right technology, training, good variety of seeds, giving the market access through inclusive business. Again, inclusive business as a market access would be very critical in really developing the agri-sector. And by that, you uplift the majority part of your economy.
May I just ask a follow-up to that? Does it take a particular kind of mentoring and training? Some of you mentioned that those are part of the approaches that you have in order to have people in the agricultural value chains and sector look at what they're doing from a more business-like perspective.
Yeah, that's very important. Typically, the intervention in agriculture would be technical in nature. You know, the technical part, increasing productivity, higher yield per hectare. No? But nowadays, there is what we call making farmers think like entrepreneurs, making them entrepreneurs. And therefore, you inject a new kind of mindset, a new kind of training and intervention. That farming, it could be a good business, but farming, you have to be competitive. Farming, you have to be productive, and so that you can really supply at a competitive price, with the right amount of supply. The bigger companies, those processing companies, and so that they will be sourcing from you. Otherwise, they'll be sourcing from elsewhere, probably importing even the raw material. So it would be a pity. And therefore, you really have to prepare farmers, think like entrepreneurs, and make it as a sustainable economic activity.
Thank you very much. Did we have a comment also from?
Yeah. In doing business agro-based sector, there are two types. There are two alternatives, I mean. One, the company acquired the land. That's it. Because most of the land owned by the people. The second alternative is let the people do doing the business, and the company as the off-taker of the such as palm oil and rubber, etc. So the government make the regulation that the companies must have what we call it as a plasma inti. That's in Indonesian word. There must be the people has to empower the people to make to grow this is the agro. That's it. So mutual benefit for the people and the companies.
Right. Thank you very much. And
let me share with our audience one quite an important industry, which is the bird's nest industry, which is big in Indonesia, big in Malaysia. We have two types of people in bird's nest. One is a large commercial, they're not small, but we have a large number of thousands of farmers which are small, SMEs, and they're poor people. So what we have done is one is funding, another is getting them to, China is a big market. Bird's nest is mainly sold to China. Firstly, funding. So through the Agriculture Bank of Malaysia, our agriculture bank, the government provided funding to them at concessionary rates. So that's the kind of help that we give them, which is normal. But the more important thing is to upgrade the products. And in our case, we had a problem with the Chinese market. The nitrite level was said to be high, and for that reason, for about 5 years, the Chinese banned the import of bird's nests from Malaysia. It's a big issue, and of course, many of them lost money. They couldn't pay the banks, and the government provided some kind of moratorium to them, the small people. But what we've done was to work with the Chinese authorities, and it took a long time to get the ban lifted by the Chinese authorities. And now they're back in business. This is an example of how we've been working closely with SMEs, through training programs, access to funding, and more importantly, getting them access into the big Chinese market. If not for government intervention, through G2G, and also through testing and various other procedures, that's it. That would be the end of the business. But with the help of the government, these small people are back in business. and they're doing quite well, although prices now are not as high as what it used to be. There was a time when prices were extremely high, but they're making quite good money through collaboration with government. So this is an example of how important it is for government to be able to understand what the problems are and work with them and foreign governments, so that there continues to be good access to the Chinese market.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that's a market that interests everyone in the region. And I see that there's some other questions that, or people who want to offer their views, but in the interest of just moving on to one other topic, and then I'm going to review some of the questions that have come in and select one or two among them. But I would also like to know, from each of your perspectives, in this new approach to inclusive business, what will success look like? How do you know if things are working? And it interests me to think about whether you focus more on the policy side. I mean, the topic of our panel is enabling inclusive business through policy, but do you try to get the regulations right and the framework right and hope that the companies will come to the understanding, or do you prefer to think of programs that you think will attract and speak to the individual entrepreneurs, direct support to entrepreneurs? You know, my own background is as a trade commissioner, and I really found that part of my work gratifying, to work directly with companies, understand what they need, do the outreach that Dato Sri was talking about, and help them come along to understand what the programs are and how they can actually succeed by using them. But I wonder, you know, what is your respective experience with the framework versus direct support?
You know that, well, that's a topic close to my heart also. I remember that was my thesis, my master several years ago, whether policy intervention or program intervention, which would have a far-reaching impact. And the basic conclusion is policy would normally have a far-reaching impact. You know, just setting a rule like 2% of pre-tax income dedicated to making sure that you help in the process of inclusive business, building an inclusive business model. Normally that would have an immediate far-reaching impact. It has to be a combination of both. So you have a policy, but you certainly would have program intervention specific to companies, and that really works pretty well. So specific programs that will enable the farmer cooperative groups to become competitive and be part of a competitive supplier group supplying big companies. And at the same time, setting a policy probably of ease of doing business that will, you know, make doing business, lower logistics costs, etc. That can really help, really facilitate trade and make it easy for SMEs, micro, to supply the bigger companies.
Thank you very much.
One specific policy which is to give preference to SMEs when it comes to government procurement. Yeah? Say small civil works costing somewhere around $15,000. Yeah? And that's only open to smaller people with small capital. And when it comes to provision of goods and services as well, there's a policy of providing preference to smaller enterprise. So this is where policy framework is very important. I know that this policy is being applied in many other ASEAN countries. But I think the issue is we have these policies in place. Once again, I think the issue of monitoring and evaluating how successful that policy is. I think in some countries the policy is there, but the follow-up is not there, and the enforcement is not there. And sometimes, you say 15% of goods and services need to be sourced from SMEs. Yeah? We're not too sure whether there's any agency which actually monitors that. So the challenge for all of us is to make sure that the policy, we have that policy in Malaysia as well, which provides preferred access for SMEs for various government goods and services. So the issue is how to make sure that this is enforced. And as a matter of fact, this has been very important, very useful in helping small, medium enterprises.
Thank you very much, and I think you've answered one of the questions that just came up on the screen about SMEs while answering the last question.
What we do is we sit together with the entrepreneurs. We have the association, we have the Chamber of Commerce, and we sit together before we make the regulation. So once again, starting with the policy, and then we sit together, discuss with the stakeholders. Then we come up with the regulation.
Very good. Now, I really can't ignore the questions that I asked people to submit any longer, so we will go to one of the questions. I thought I saw one about FDI, about inward investment. I thought that's quite interesting. So one question submitted was, your countries are trying hard to attract FDI, foreign direct investment. Many are in manufacturing. Do you have an active push and programs to incorporate the inclusive business concept into attracting foreign direct investment? And I'll go to Vice Minister Khan at the end because we haven't had a chance to hear him in the question and answer session yet.
Yes, we do think about the incorporation of the IB concept into the FDI attraction policy. And as I mentioned to you, that there are a number of FDI companies in Vietnam already actively participated in our public-private partnership program for sustainable development in agriculture. Like I said, because we have the 4 areas that we may help the small farmers, that is the market, the knowledge, the finance, and the technology. So that is why many companies can participate in this program, and we do include the IB concept into our policy. So, for example, if you can connect yourself with the farmers in Vietnam to help them to sell the products, and then we may have some preferential policy toward that kind of company or toward that kind of sectors. So we do that in our policy.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to provide their views?
Incorporating the IB concept into FDIs, of course, is very important to lift the performance of SMEs. Yeah? But I must say, this is an area that sometimes we are weak. Yeah? We're not strong. When we attract FDIs, it is not all the time that we insist on stringent conditions. Yeah? And sometimes it is a kind of afterthought. Yeah? So this is something that we need to correct. Having said that, some companies on their own, some foreign companies on their own, which come to ASEAN on their own, they have their own programs. They have the programs in order to get SMEs to be part of the global value chain. We have examples in Malaysia where some FDIs, some multinational companies, have actually nurtured the development of local SMEs. They have gone to the world market, some exporting to many countries throughout the world. So, but the success, there's not too many successes. So if you ask me, I'm not happy. Yeah? That I would like to see more IB concept incorporated into FDIs. And the next thing to do is how to make sure, is it going to be a compulsory kind of thing, or is it voluntary? In most cases, it is kind of voluntary. Yeah? So there's got to be some elements of tying up the incentives with foreign investment. I mean, whether they can include SMEs into the program will be a very important element in considering incentives given to foreign direct investments.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see time is marching on, and we have time for one last question. You've very generously given of your time, all of our honorable guests. Thank you so much. And describe some of the programs and the things that are working and how they're working up until now. Maybe looking to the future, we'll say the last question would be about what are the possible policy areas for improvement to increase the impact on marginalized sectors through these inclusive business models. So where could we see the sectors where public policy could be improved and deliver more results in the area under inclusive business? Looking at the third question on the screen. And do we have any ideas, Vice Minister?
Yes, we indeed, we have evaluated the operation of the program in Vietnam. and we found that there listed a number of issues that we could and should improve. Namely, we need to provide the easy access to agriculture finance for smallholders farmers, and easy access to high technology, for example, the drones or bioengineering, etc., and digital farming application, for example, the weather and disease forecast for the farmers. The second area that we may have to improve is to improve the climate resilience for our farmers. For example, we need to do the very good forecast or introducing the specific production models in order to help our farmers to adapt with the climate change. And then we may do better in providing the skills training to improve the quality and standards of products. You know that the consumers in the world now, they are very aware of the standards and the quality. And in order to meet the high standards of our export market, we need to do better to provide the information and technology for our farmers. And last but not least, we need to focus them on more in-depth processed products so to help them to move gradually up the value chain. So they are now producing and exporting the raw material. So if we can help them to add a little bit value into that product, that could be much better for them. So these are the areas that we need to improve in the future.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, may I say it's been a delight. And are there any final words from any of our panelists before we close the session?
Maybe I'll just make use of the final word as a follow-through answer to that. It would be a combination of maybe enabling the suppliers, basically the micro SME part, the farmers and cooperatives, to enabling them in terms of training, mentoring, product development, and microfinancing. And on the other hand, on the market access, probably a policy that will, a hard policy could be requiring all companies at least 5 to 10% of their requirement, raw materials or service requirements would be sourced from the small guys, as a policy and market access. But of course, that's a hard policy. It could just be on the other way. Instead of a stick, could be a carrot, giving incentives.
I like the creative thoughts behind that. Thank you very much. And may I also close by emphasizing that Canada is ready to be your partner, and it is in all of our interests to see the businesses in this region grow and prosper, and we're really in this together. So thank you very much. Thanks to our audience and to our ministers.
Thank you very much. May we ask our excellencies and ministers on stage to please remain for a photo opportunity. Thank you very much once again, Secretary Ramon M. Lopez, His Excellency Engraciaso Lutita, His Excellency Dr. Shri Mustafa Mohammed, His Excellency Gemari Polsela, His Excellency Tranco Khan, and together with our moderator, Ms. Marie Louise Hannan. And now to take us the way forward for inclusive business in ASEAN is Undersecretary and Board of Investments Managing Head, Dr. Severino S. Rodolfo.